coffee shop fell silent as James Mitchell wiped away a tear, unaware that three identical faces were watching his private moment of grief. The empty chair across from him seemed to scream his loneliness to everyone present. Everyone except the Triplet girls who approached his table with determined little steps. "Excuse me, mister," the bravest one whispered. "Would you pretend to be our father today?" If you've ever felt that life, changing moments come when you least expect them. You'll want to stay until the very end of this story. What happened next transformed not just one broken heart, but four. If this story touches you, please consider leaving a like and subscribing to the channel for more stories that remind us how unexpected connections can heal our deepest wounds. James had been sitting alone at his regular table by the window of the corner cafe for precisely 45 minutes, the same amount of time he'd spent there every Sunday for the past 3 years. It was a ritual that both comforted and tortured him, a self-inflicted reminder of everything he'd lost. 3 years ago, his wife Sarah and their unborn child had died in a car accident on a rainy Sunday morning, just 2 blocks from this very cafe where they had planned to meet for breakfast. The first anniversary of their death, he'd found himself walking robotically to the cafe, ordering 2 cups of tea, one for himself, one for Sarah, and sitting in silence as both grew cold. Now it was a ritual he couldn't break, even as his therapist suggested it might be time to create new associations with Sunday mornings. So here he sat, absently stirring a tea he wouldn't drink, when the 3 identical girls, no older than 7, approached his table. They were dressed in matching blue dresses with white collars, their dark hair pulled back in identical braids. Only their expressions differentiated them, one curious, one hesitant, one determined. It was the determined one who had spoken, her small voice surprisingly steady. "I'm sorry," James said, blinking away his reverie. "You want me to what?" The determined Triplet glanced over her shoulder toward a harried-looking woman at the counter, then leaned in closer. "Our mom is talking to that man again, the one who makes her cry. We thought if we had a dad with us, just for pretend, maybe he'd go away." The hesitant Triplet added softly, "We've never had a real dad before." The curious one simply studied James's face, her eyes lingering on the 2 cups of tea. "Why do you have 2 teas if you're alone?" James felt something crack inside his chest, not painfully, but like ice breaking on a frozen river when spring finally arrives. Before he could think about what he was doing, he was pulling out the 3 empty chairs at his 4-person table. "Well, I'm not alone anymore, am I? I'm having tea with 3 young ladies now. My name is James. Would you like to join me?" The Triplets exchanged triumphant glances and scrambled into the chairs. The determined one immediately turned and waved dramatically toward the counter. James followed her gaze to see a tired-looking woman in her early 30s, her face tight with stress as she spoke in hushed tones with a man whose back was to them. When she spotted her daughters waving, her eyes widened in alarm, then narrowed when she saw the stranger they were sitting with. She quickly excused herself from the conversation and hurried over, the man at the counter watching with an expression that shifted from charm to irritation. "Girls, what are you doing?" "I'm so sorry, sir." "Lily, Rose, Violet, we don't bother strangers." Her voice was tight with embarrassment, but James noticed the slight tremble in it, the redness around her eyes. "They're no bother at all," James said, rising to his feet and extending his hand. "I'm James Mitchell. Your daughters were kind enough to keep me company." The determined Triplet, Lily, apparently, stood up on her chair. "We told him he could be our pretend daddy today, Mom. Just for in here." The woman's face flushed crimson. "Lily, I'm so sorry, Mr. Mitchell. Girls, get your things. We're leaving." "But Mom," the 3 protested in unison. James found himself speaking before he'd fully formed the thought. "Actually, I'd be honored to be their pretend dad for a bit, if that's all right with you. I lost my wife 3 years ago today, and sitting here alone has become a bit of a habit. Your daughters just brighten my whole day." Something in his honest admission made the woman pause. She looked from James to her daughter's hopeful faces, then back to the man at the counter, who was now openly watching them with narrowed eyes. "I'm Eleanor Parker," she said finally, her voice softer. "And apparently my daughters have decided you're part of our Sunday now." She hesitated, then added, "Would you mind terribly if I joined as well? I could use a break from certain conversations." James pulled out the fourth chair. Nothing would make me happier. That Sunday morning in the corner cafe changed everything for James Mitchell. As Eleanor and her triplet daughters Lily, Rose, and Violet settled around the table that had known only grief for 3 years, the empty chair finally held someone real instead of a ghost. The girls peppered him with questions. What was his favorite color? Did he know how to braid hair? Could he read in funny voices? Did he like cookies or brownies better? Eleanor explained in quiet asides between the girls' chatter that she was a single mother by choice. She'd used a sperm donor to have her daughters, never expecting to have triplets. She'd been raising them alone since birth, with occasional help from her mother, who lived across town. The man at the counter was Roger, an ex-boyfriend who couldn't seem to accept that their relationship was over, and who had recently escalated from texts to showing up wherever Eleanor might be. "The girls have never had a father figure," she whispered while the triplets argued over which princess was best. "I think that's why well, I'm sorry they put you on the spot." James watched the 3 identical faces, animated in conversation, and felt something he hadn't experienced in 3 years: purpose. "They didn't put me on the spot," he said. "They pulled me out of a very dark place I've been sitting in for too long." By the time they'd finished their impromptu tea party, Roger had left in obvious frustration. The girls had extracted a promise from James to read them a story next time, and Eleanor had hesitantly accepted his offer to walk them to their car. When they reached the small blue sedan, the triplets insisted on hugs from their pretend daddy for today, and James found himself crouching down to embrace each one, breathing in the scent of children's shampoo and innocence. "Thank you," Eleanor said softly as the girls climbed into the back seat. "You have no idea what today meant to them. To us." James looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not just a harried single mother, but a woman with kind eyes and strength etched into the tired lines of her face. "I think I do," he said, "because I know what it meant to me." As they drove away, James stood in the parking lot feeling strangely anchored to the present moment in a way he hadn't in years. When he returned to his apartment, he did something he hadn't done since Sarah died. He put away her photograph from the bedside table, not to forget her, but to make room for whatever might come next. The following Sunday, James arrived at the corner cafe with a children's book tucked under his arm, ordering just 1 cup of tea. He didn't expect Eleanor and the girls to return. Why would they? But something had shifted in him. He could sit alone now without feeling the crushing weight of Sarah's absence. He could breathe. He was halfway through his tea when the bell above the door jingled and 3 identical voices called out, "Pretend Daddy." James turned to find the triplets rushing toward him, Eleanor following behind with an apologetic, "But please smile." "We didn't plan to come," she explained as her daughters clambered around James, examining the book he'd brought with excited exclamations. "But they wouldn't talk about anything else all week. I hope we're not intruding." "You could never intrude," James said, and meant it with every fiber of his being. That second Sunday became a third, then a fourth. James learned that Lily was the born leader, always 3 steps ahead of everyone else. Rose was the peacemaker, sensitive to others' feelings in a way that seemed almost mystical for a 7-year-old. Violet was the dreamer, constantly lost in her imagination, seeing magic in the most ordinary things. And Eleanor was extraordinary, raising these three distinct personalities with patience, humor, and a fierce love that humbled him. He learned that Eleanor worked as a pediatric nurse, often taking night shifts so she could be with the girls during the day. Her mother, Helen, helped with childcare when schedules overlapped, but the bulk of parenting fell to Eleanor alone. Roger had been a brief relationship that ended when he became possessive, but he refused to accept the breakup, escalating his behavior from text to coincidental appearances wherever Eleanor might be. The restraining order is being processed, Eleanor confided one Sunday while the girls were in the bathroom. But the system moves slowly, and he's careful to stay just on the right side of harassment. James felt a protective anger rise in him that he hadn't experienced since Sarah was alive. "Is there anything I can do to help?" Eleanor smiled sadly. "You already are. He hasn't shown up here since that first." Have you ever had a moment when life seemed determined to humiliate you, only to surprise you with something beautiful instead? That's exactly what happened to me. If you're enjoying this incredible journey already, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more heartwarming stories that remind us all second chances are worth taking. Now, let me tell you how I met the love of my life, looking like I just wrestled an alligator in a swamp. Emma Parker rushed down the rain, slicked sidewalk, cursing under her breath as she checked her watch for the 5th time in 2 minutes. She was already 15 minutes late for the blind date her well-meaning but persistent best friend had arranged. A date Emma had reluctantly agreed to after months of Hannah's relentless campaigning. "He's perfect for you," Hannah had insisted. "Smart, successful, kind, and he has the most adorable daughter." Emma had finally caved, less from interest and more from exhaustion at Hannah's persistence. Dating hadn't been a priority since her last relationship imploded spectacularly 2 years ago, leaving her nursing wounds that still occasionally ached when she let her guard down. The light rain that had been falling all day suddenly intensified, transforming into a downpour. Emma ducked her head and quickened her pace, clutching her purse to her chest to protect her phone. The upscale restaurant where she was meeting her mystery date was just a block away when disaster struck. A sleek black SUV sped through a puddle beside her, sending a wave of muddy water cascading over her cream-colored dress and carefully styled hair. Emma gasped, freezing in shock as the cold, filthy water soaked through to her skin. "No, no, no," she moaned, looking down at herself in horror. Her once elegant outfit was now a splattered mess of brown and gray. Droplets of mud clung to her hair and face. She looked like she'd been mud wrestling. For a brief moment, Emma considered turning around and going home. She could text Hannah, make up some excuse about feeling ill, but something stopped her. Perhaps it was stubbornness, or the knowledge that Hannah would never let her hear the end of it. Or maybe it was the tiny voice inside that whispered she'd spent too long hiding from possibilities. Taking a deep breath, Emma marched toward the restaurant, her ruined heels squelching with every step. She tried to wipe some of the mud from her face, but only succeeded in smearing it further. The maitre gave her a horrified look as she approached, water dripping onto the polished marble floor. "I have a reservation," she said with as much dignity as she could muster. "Under Calloway or Parker." Inside the elegant restaurant, Jackson Calloway checked his watch again, sighing deeply. He'd promised himself he'd wait exactly 20 minutes before leaving. As a single father running a tech empire, time was his most precious commodity, one he couldn't afford to waste. His daughter's nanny had canceled at the last minute, forcing him to bring 8-year old Lily along and seat her at a nearby table with her tablet and headphones. She was happily drawing digital pictures, occasionally glancing up to give him encouraging smiles that melted his heart. Jackson hadn't wanted to come on this date in the first place. His sister Claire had badgered him for months, insisting he needed to get back out there. 3 years had passed since his wife walked out, declaring that motherhood and marriage had been mistakes that interfered with her career ambitions. The wound had healed, but the scar remained, a constant reminder to protect himself and, more importantly, to protect Lily. The maitre approached his table with an uncomfortable expression. "Mr. Calloway, your guest has arrived." Jackson looked up to thank him and froze, his eyes widening at the sight before him. A woman stood there, completely drenched and covered in mud from head to toe. Her hair hung in wet clumps, mascara streaked down her cheeks, and her once white dress was now a canvas of brown splatters. His first instinct was to assume this was some kind of practical joke. His second was irritation that someone would show up in such a state to a high-end restaurant. His third, which surprised him most, was curiosity, because despite the mud and the mess, there was something in the way she held herself, a dignity, a refusal to be embarrassed. And when she met his gaze, her eyes sparkled with a combination of humor and defiance that caught him completely off guard. "I'm Emma Parker," she said, extending a slightly muddy hand. "And before you say anything, I should warn you that I've had a spectacularly bad day, and if you make a joke about me looking like swamp, things less attractive cousin, I might just have to dump what's left of this puddle in my shoe onto your very expensive-looking shirt." Jackson found himself laughing despite his best intentions. He took her hand and shook it firmly. "Jackson Calloway, and I was actually thinking more Mud Monster from the Black Lagoon." Emma's laugh was genuine and warm, lighting up her face beneath the mud streaks. "Well, at least you didn't run away screaming." "The day's still young," he replied with a small smile. The maitre d' cleared his throat awkwardly. "Perhaps Madam would like to visit our restroom facilities before being seated." Emma glanced down at herself and grimaced. "That might be wise, yes. Thank you." As she walked away, Jackson realized he was at a crossroads. The sensible thing would be to make his excuses and leave. This woman was clearly chaos personified, and chaos was exactly what he'd worked so hard to eliminate from his life after picking up the pieces his ex-wife had left behind. But then he caught sight of Lily watching the exchange with wide, fascinated eyes. She gave him a thumbs up and mouth. "I like her!" And something in him softened. Maybe a little chaos wasn't always a bad thing. In the bathroom, Emma did her best to salvage what she could of her appearance. She washed the mud from her face and arms, tried to rinse the worst of it from her hair, and used paper towels to dab at the stains on her dress. It was hopeless, of course. She still looked like she'd been dragged backward through a mudslide. "You could just leave," she told her reflection. "Call it a day. Order takeout. Watch a movie with your cat." But then she thought about the man waiting outside. He hadn't laughed at her, well, not unkindly anyway. There had been something in his eyes, amusement, yes, but also a spark of interest. And he was, objectively speaking, gorgeous. Tall with broad shoulders, dark hair with just a touch of silver at the temples, and eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled. "Oh, what the hell?" Emma muttered, straightening her shoulders. "It's not like I can look any worse." When she returned to the table, she was surprised to find Jackson still there, waiting, and even more surprised to see a young girl now sitting beside him, looking at Emma with undisguised curiosity and delight. "You look like you wrestled a mud monster and won," the girl said, her eyes wide with admiration. Jackson looked mortified. "Emma, this is my daughter Lily. She was supposed to stay at her own table, but she was curious. I wanted to meet the mud lady. Lily explained matter of factly. Dad never brings interesting people to dinner. Emma couldn't help but laugh. Well, I'm honored to be considered interesting.
It's nice to meet you, Lily.
Why are you all muddy? Lily asked, ignoring her father's gentle Lily manners. Emma sat down, feeling strangely comfortable despite her appearance. A car drove through a puddle and splashed me. It wasn't their fault. They probably didn't even see me, but it did make for a rather dramatic entrance. Like in the movies, Lily exclaimed. When something bad happens but it turns out good in the end. We'll see about that, Emma said with a wry smile, glancing at Jackson. He was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. I have to admit, most women would have gone home to change, or canceled altogether. Emma shrugged. I considered it, but I figured, what's the worst that could happen? You'd take one look at me and run for the hills. I almost did, he admitted. Why didn't you? Jackson's eyes flicked toward his daughter, then back to Emma. Curiosity, I suppose, and Lily's endorsement. She has good instincts about people. Plus, Lily added, Dad says it's important to be brave and not judge books by their covers. Your dad sounds pretty wise, Emma said, something warm unfurling in her chest as she watched Jackson's expression soften when he looked at his daughter. The waiter approached, visibly trying to maintain his professional demeanor despite Emma's appearance. She ordered a glass of red wine. Might as well complete the disaster outfit with some spill potential. And Jackson ordered a scotch. So, he said after the waiter left, tell me about yourself. When you're not making dramatic mud, covered entrances into fancy restaurants, that is. Emma smiled, feeling herself relax for the first time. I run a small bookstore downtown. It specializes in rare and antique books, but we have plenty of contemporary titles, too. It was my parents' shop, but they retired to Florida 3 years ago, and I took over, a bookstore owner, Jackson said thoughtfully. That explains a lot, does it? The quiet confidence, the willingness to face public humiliation rather than break a commitment, the slightly romantic worldview that things might work out despite initial appearances. Emma raised an eyebrow. That's quite an analysis from a man who